There's always a mic switch up here. Probably won't be the last one. Lawrence is making people move. Are we set? We good? Okay, great. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your work and for being here at the festival. I guess I'm very tickled by like your opposite ends of the spectrum of your sort of like careers. And I guess I'm just wondering if maybe that we could start out just talking about that a little bit, like maybe you just very brief history of your career as a maker. And then Lane, I don't know if this is your first project or like what year you're in school. I only know that you've had Louisa and you survived somehow. So if you just want to talk about how you came to documentary making, this project in particular, or your projects here in particular.
Yeah, I really didn't get into documentary until I started taking classes at CU. So I'm going in my senior year this upcoming fall. I kind of blanked out the rest of the questions there. This isn't my first project. I've done some other ones before that were just like hanging out with my video camera when I was really young. So
Cool, thanks.
You were way ahead of me than when I was your age, for sure. So that's amazing. I went to college thinking I was going to be a marine biologist, and ended up kind of finding, through taking painting and drawing classes, found a documentary class in the basement of the art building. And it was a very different time. It was in the 90s. It was a pre-digital moment where I ended up having to go to grad school to even sort of access equipment to be able to learn how to make work. And so now, that was 27 years ago. So now I get to teach, and I'm a professor, and get to work with students, and it's really extraordinary in our digital moment, taking ideas and the technology at our disposal. I think the possibilities of actually sort of making smart and compelling work are, I don't want to over sort of romanticize or oversimplify the process, and it's certainly not fully democratized. But I think comparatively over the history of sort of representation, the propensity to access equipment is better than it has been, and so yeah, that's awesome.
That also makes me think of something I read somewhere in your statement about your work, that you think of documentary's potential as inherently queer. So, I mean, I guess that's more conceptually about documentary than about the, democratization of the technology and everything. But would you care to elaborate a little bit maybe on that, that idea?
Yeah, I mean, if we sort of think about queer theory, certainly using gender and sexuality studies as sort of starting points to question cultural norms, I think by extension, you can sort of extrapolate that into questioning cultural norms and sort of systemic notions of power or normalcy on any register. And so in some ways, I think documentarians kind of looking at the world differently, or putting things into a different frame, or seeking to ask questions that haven't been asked, or to recenter voices that haven't been sort of given the opportunity to speak, all those sorts of things have a certain inherent queerness to them. So yeah, that's those are all the reasons why I realized that I think my initial interests in being a marine biologist weren't quantitative, they were really more qualitative and phenomenological and narrative. And so finding filmmaking was really an amazing way, and documentary production in particular was really an amazing way to be able to encounter individuals and ask those kinds of questions.
So I guess let's talk maybe about the individuals that you are encountering in your project. You have Jesse, Richard, and Devin, right? And Lane, you have yourself, which is, I think, you have made. We were talking the other day in the conversation about your former like autobiographical work, and I think that's something that maybe is a really difficult thing for young emerging artists to do, right? To like really turn the lens on yourself, even though it's also like maybe especially during the pandemic, right? Like that's who we have the easiest access to in that type of situation is yourself. So I'm wondering if maybe you could each talk about how you came to your protagonist. And Lane, I'm not sure if this was a class project or if you had already started it, but like what the sort of impetus was.
Yes. So I was taking, what is it called? Documentary media poetics. And so that has a really strong focus on like experimental types of films. So, I mean, you're in your early 20s and you're trying to figure out who you are and your identity. And, the pandemic gave a lot of people time to reflect on themselves. So that class was an online class. So I'm spending a lot of time with myself in the winter. And um, so, yeah, there's not really any other protagonists except for me. And when you're sitting at your home for long periods of time thinking about yourself, you're always doing that morning routine, and that's kind of how that idea manifested.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say that, but you had already been like recording for a fairly long time, right? Like you already had, I assume, like that impulse to be documenting, right? Like before this documentary poetics class sort of led you to the form that this film took, I assume.
Yeah, so in the trans community, it's kind of like a thing to do your voice updates um when you have your shot, like so that's kind of that idea. And then I am a very sentimental person and I like to go through a lot of my photos, so like seeing that and then just adding on that part to the end is like seeing the whole thing come together. And
I really love your piece because I think a lot of the work that really inspired me to want to make the kind of work that I do, which is really largely, in some ways, of the things I watched at the festival, some of the most conventional in some respects, in the sense of taking character-driven stories, sort of relatable individual experiences, and using them as a springboard or a catalyst to sort of larger social questioning. And I think the kind of perhaps subversive, or if you're going to call anything radical in my work, even though I don't think it has to be, has always been just the people I choose and the issues that I frame, making work about my own sort of journeys with addiction, or making films around sort of a woman who's sort of queering death and bringing death and dying back into community and into culture and out of the hands of medical and funerary forces, these sorts of things. But many of the filmmakers who really inspired me were sort of lesbian, gay, and feminist video artists of the 1980s and 1990s. So like Marlon Riggs, complete hero, Rhea Tajiri, video artist, Vanillin Green, all these people who essentially were sort of in a pre-digital moment, but in a video moment, we're sort of literally putting their bodies on the line in front of a camera and being vulnerable and fallible and complex. And so I'm a huge proponent of autobiography, and yet in this digital moment with social media, in some respects, I keep sort of wondering or questioning sort of if there's still sort of like a political edge or a rage or efficacy or complexity or artistry to autobiography when sort of digital sort of presentations of self become in some ways kind of this daily ablution or something like that. And so I think your piece is so fantastic for the ways in which you take those social media sort of texts and framings that you've made of yourself, but then also reframe them in another way to sort of to tell another story in another mode. And so that sort of switch is a really cool one that was exciting to see.
I think it was Devin, the painter, who I can't remember exactly at what point. Maybe it's like at the unveiling of that sort of mobile barbershop project. But Devin starts talking about like wanting to maybe or sort of feeling limited by painting or by like, certain media as not like social enough of a project. And that kind of got me thinking about maybe ways. And I believe you said you hadn't like met any of your like Devin, Jesse, or Richard before you started the project, but I'm wondering like if they thought of this as like a social project that they were working with you on, or like how the when we first meet Devin, like it seems like there's this one gallery show and then things obviously evolve over time in like a really like satisfying way to that mobile barbershop, which I can't remember the name of the project. I'm sorry. But so I'm just wondering like maybe how you came to be along that journey with him, or like how much time passed, and also like, if these folks maybe felt at all like they had any co-creation with you, or if you felt that.
To answer the barbershop project question, the Mighty Mighty project, one of the blessings of, in a way, kind of working slower than I wanted to. I shot a lot of this in 2017, and then it was a kind of exciting but intense time at my college building a department, and it's like those things sit on the drive over there and you're like, oh, my film's over there. But that delay actually meant that, Devin at the time in 2017 was really kind of just starting to feel that ambivalence as he became an art star, essentially, about the efficacy of painting. And then in 2019, he was able to do this social project. So it took him about 2 years to figure out a context to do it. But that delay of time meant that I could actually include that in the piece, and it gave this amazing sort of like coda or arc that I couldn't have imagined. The making of the project itself and whether or not it's sort of like a collaborative social practice, it's an interesting one. I went on a journey from making autobiographical work, where I was accountable to no one but myself, to making a work about sort of one other sort of central character through whom I sort of accessed a community, to this one, which is really kind of new for me, in which I'm sort of weaving together 3 people's lives. And I think I mentioned in a Q&A earlier this week that there's some complexity in that, and in a sense of sort of really thinking like, what does it mean when you take 3 strangers and start to sort of weave their lives and make relational sort of connections between them when they actually don't have those connections in real life too. So I've been doing a lot of thinking and a lot of learning from this project, but when we actually film, the footprint is like very small. I mean, it's me and Lee, my husband slash producer slash sound guy. It's just us. So in that sense, I think all three of those individuals have, in a way, become friends now. The filming itself is very kind of intimate. I mentioned that Q&A earlier this week that, having made autobiographical work means I can actually share that work in advance, and people can find out more about me than they might ever want to, but also kind of see, hopefully, as I mentioned before, that I can handle vulnerable and sort of personal aspects of people's lives with a certain degree of respect and sensitivity. And I think that was helpful for all of them. I think in some ways, all three of them kind of forgot this film had even happened, because it took me so many years to get it together. And I finally got it cut together. Another kind of glass half full perspective of the pandemic was I had footage to work with as we were all locked down, and I shared the piece with them, and I think they're all excited about it, and I think are really now kind of only sort of seeing the possibilities of it as it gets out there. So I think in a way, thinking about what we can do with this piece is really the space where it's starting to become more kind of a collaborative, generative, co-creative thing. Kind of like, I made this thing, what are we going to do with it now? So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just in terms of, community action beyond like not that this isn't a lovely experience to all be here watching it in a nice
it is a
cinema
lovely
space,
experience,
but
this has been an amazing week and such an amazing festival.
Well, I wasn't fishing for compliments, but thank you. But just beyond this type of screening, right? Like I know that you want to engage in other types of like community, just bringing, for instance, maybe now is a good time to say that we have Maeve and Mateo here from Boulder's own queer hair studio, which Broderick reached out to them, and told them about this project and about the festival and invited them here. And they've been like telling folks at their shop about Broderick's work. And I think like that kind of relationship is a really powerful stepping stone. So so thinking about the co-creation beyond the actual production, I think is definitely super productive. So I would love to open it up to folks who might have questions for Broderick and Lane.
And maybe really quick, just to start off, maybe we can give the mic to Maeve and Mateo just to tell people about Mal.
Well, hi everyone.
Hi.
My name is Mateo, and this is my partner Maeve. And almost a year to the date, a couple weeks, we opened up a queer-focused hair studio just across the street at Indie Salons. It's called Mal. And there was a couple reasons why we created the space. We were ultimately just kind of tired of the microaggressions and sort of the performative allyship that you can kind of see across some salons in the area. And I think what Broderick was able to sort of capture so eloquently in his film was that haircuts for queer and trans-identified folks can be both a stressor and a luxury at the exact same time. And it's like, it really highlights the importance of these spaces, but also to have actually queer folks behind the counter performing these services who have those shared lived experiences really sort of drives home. So really, thank you so much for creating the movie and inviting us out here. It really meant a lot.
Well, Boulder's lucky. It's awesome you all are here.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get some questions.
Of course, I'm just wondering, where and how did you find the naked barber? I can't. I'm buying my ticket to Sydney. I want to get services right now. So tell us more about how you discovered him.
It's I'm trying to remember if I'd heard of Richard before. I mean, Lee has a long history in Australia, so we go to Sydney a lot. And the death care worker I was describing before is Australian, and that film was in a community in Australia. So, but I think it's sort of one of the wonders of the internet. It's just really sort of seeking people out. I found Jesse and I think the Naked Barber too, both through internet searches. I'm an art tragic, so actually I knew of Devin's work before the film had started. But yeah, that's one of the positive sides of the internet. Yeah, I knew starting out with this piece. In some ways, I had a very strong plan, but I also let myself kind of let go a little bit more with this one. I knew the questions that I wanted to ask. I knew that I wanted to look at, sort of tap into the fact that the queer community has a long history of using beards and barbering and body hair as spaces of kind of performative play and expression and experimentation in kind of reflexive and fun ways. And so I was looking intentionally for participants who, through their kind of professions or their art or their sort of daily performances of self, were engaging through beards, barbering, or body hair in fashions that sort of challenge those sort of outmoded binaries. And so I think I was looking for like queer barbers, or I was doing like a lot of keyword searches. Maybe it's my good academic background helps me do sort of like lit searches and things like that. But started finding some really extraordinary people. And I think even since 2017, I think the possibilities have grown even more, which is really exciting to see. I mean, we just did a Q&A we screened the film at Outfest in LA a few weeks ago, and Jesse and Devin were both able to come, and Devin has this gorgeous sort of like grown out hair now. You can see it starting to grow out at the end of the movie. And he was even talking about how since 2017, the availability of products and even just sort of like general cultural awareness in terms of caring for just a wider range of hair types and all of that has shifted so much since 2017 even. So, which is also really awesome to hear.
Other questions out there? Toma. Wait, just hang on 1 second. Sorry. There's going to be a mic in your face in a second.
So did the idea for the story of the documentary that connects the three individuals, did that come after your initial meeting with Devin or knowing of Devin before this became a thing? Or has this always been kind of like an idea in your head that you just wanted to kind of connect through the lenses of multiple, people of different walks of life? Was it like spurred on by something, or is this something close to you like for a while now?
Well, I mean, speaking of autobiographical films, one of my earliest films called "The Skin I'm In." If you watch that, you'll see that I have a hair history of my own in some ways. I definitely do not profess to be a trained hair professional by any stretch of the imagination. But in my young 20s, when I was figuring out who I was as a gay man and a queer person, I kind of had a bit of a naked barber journey of my own, an alter ego named Rick, who was giving haircuts to friends and strangers too, and probably unwittingly was trying to sort of form and create safe spaces and spaces of play and things like that through barbering. And so there's definitely that sort of history for sure. But I can't remember if I mentioned this in the other Q&A, but I actually filmed with a few more people than are in the film. And ultimately, the first 2 months of editing for me was figuring out what the film wasn't before I could figure out what it was. And it was really kind of the barbershop space as the locus that really kind of connected, and I think really kind of sparked the way to kind of express some of those questions I'd outlined in a more crystallized and focused way. And because of that, I think I became aware of things that, as I mentioned, like that I maybe had been intuitively longing for, and learned a lot along the way too. And I think in terms of Devin and Jesse and Richard sort of being able to kind of engage with, you know, a wide array of different sort of registers of identity underneath a queer umbrella. I could not have sort of like planned that out better. I mean, to be able to touch on so many different registers of identity, I think was really, and refract that issue through those registers was really a real gift. And even some of those other people that I filmed with, I think that footage is still compelling to me. I think there may be a short film or another project out of some of that other material, but I mean, it wasn't sort of barber related as much. It was an Icelandic artist, another sort of cis hetero artist who has sort of comes from a Nordic beard-driven culture, who can't grow facial hair himself and kind of plays around with what he kind of describes as patheticist art, where he kind of like takes the piss out of like the male patriarchy in his artwork. And then a really interesting scholar named Christopher Oldstone Moore, who's written a book called Of Beards and Men, that kind of looks at sort of the history of beards as performance and power in Western history, who's also like an ultimate Frisbee player and all these other sorts of things. And so I've got this amazing footage. I think hopefully I'll be able to make something out of that too someday.
Hi, yeah, thank you both. Those are really beautiful films. I have a sort of general question, which I stole from one of my students because it's kind of a head scratcher, but I think it can lead to really interesting answers, and it's for both of you. The question they always ask is, what did you leave in your film, and what did you take with you in the process of making this film?
Okay, all right. What did I leave? I think in some ways, even now, finally seeing the film come together and actually engaging with audiences, there's something kind of like, there is something personally cathartic about it that I didn't really necessarily even know that I was kind of grieving in some way. I mean, I cut my own hair and haven't been to a barber in probably 25 years. I mean, and even Lee, there was this kind of funny thing where we'd been filming with the Naked Barber for a few days, and we'd done the body grooming stuff. And on the last day, I was like, shit, I don't have him cutting hair. And he's this amazing hair cutter. He used to like, you know, style Kate Moss's hair on the runways of London. And like, we need to get a haircut with this guy. And so I was like, Lee, you're getting a haircut. And just sort of plunked Lee in the chair, and Lee got a straight razor shave. And clearly you can see in the movie that Lee had this very emotional response to that too. So I think in some ways we're like these, you know, we've done our personal work and gotten over our parental issues, and like, you know, feel like we're kind of out and living our authentic lives. And I think even both of us kind of realized like there's still stuff, you know. So I think I was able to leave a lot of that, and sort of what's the other part that what do you take with me? Yeah. I guess all that learning too. I mean, I think even as somebody who's sort of queer identified, who thinks that they're pretty aware, I think being able to kind of engage with these three participants who we have some degree of commonality in terms of queerness, but a tremendous amount of difference as well. I feel like I learned an incredible amount and continue to learn a lot too. And it's always a relief when you realize you can still learn things. So that's great.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer this in a way that makes sense. I think it's more of something I took with me, is that my like journey, I guess, is ever changing. Like I just had an appointment with my doctor like not that long ago to like switch my medication. So like the process is never ending really. It's always like a journey of figuring out who you are. Would I leave? It's hard. How do do you answer that question? What do your students say? Tell me. Yeah.
I think it's interesting because it pushes you to, interpret that in a positive or a negative way, essentially, right? I mean, you answered it in a very positive way about like sort of ways that you realized that there was still things that you were working through and you kind of got to leave those behind. But it could also be like, so it could be positive in that sense, or it could be like, I actually like lost this thing, to this film in a way, or
Yeah, I think part of it might be like school project restrictions, like don't go too long with the film. Like, you can't include everything. And I feel like this, actually wasn't as happy as I thought I would be, like making this piece. And there's still things that I wish that I included and like did differently.
Lane, do you think you'll? Is this on? Yeah. Do you think you'll keep making documentary that's this personal?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, at least like you was saying, like when you're young, you need to kind of figure out who you are before you go to other projects and figure out who other people are. So.
And what was it like to show it? I mean, you're showing it, you're sharing your work now in a festival. There's people here in the room, there's people watching it online, right? But then that's, I assume, feels very different than showing it like to your own classmates in the classroom, right?
I didn't even want to show it to my class.
Mhm.
Louisa was like, I didn't get to see your documentary poetics film, so I need to see it. And then I sent it to her and she's like, oh, we should show this in class. And I was like, I don't know about that. And now we're here. So I'm really appreciative for this opportunity. For sure.
Yeah. So this is like the deep end. Now you can show it to anybody. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, students in a classroom critique situation, I feel like it can be harder to, to share work with each other when you are seeing each other in a bunch of different contexts, like a bunch of different classes. And, as a former teacher, like I feel Louise's pain where you see a student's work and you're like, oh, this is really great. Like you need to share it. But then it's also like, you got to come to that in your own time. So, any last questions out there before we call it a night?
I do have another question for Lane, actually. And it's related to maybe the previous two topics of discussion. Obviously, once I think it's February 2020, the trajectory of your film becomes really, I don't know, we're following it and we get the sequence that you're building toward, the sequence of your transformation. But I think that where your piece is also very interesting is in the selection of moments in time that precedes that. So I'd be curious if you could speak a little more about how you dug into that personal archive and the moments that you chose to include, why those, and how did you make that journey from maybe when you were 1 year old, that's the earliest image of you, up until that February 2020 significant date?
Yeah. I think a lot of my identity is being adopted from China, and also not having that. So, sorry. I picked those moments mostly because those were the biggest parts of my identity. So the like picture with my parents and I with the American flags, and like all of those clips from the videos are very core memories for me, for like my friends who've been there to support me throughout my journey, and like all those videos of me when I was younger are also kind of things that I look back on, and not often, but when I look at them, it's like, oh, that's where I was, and now this is who I am. So that's kind of why I picked those ones. I got to that answer eventually.
Yeah, it's really, I just wanted to say that it's a really interesting and compelling selection of moments, and very, I think every shot in there and every moment really punctuates a moment, a second or a moment in your life that we're able to then bring back to who you are today. And that's not easy work. So I really commend you on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both again so much. And thank you all for coming. And maybe we'll hopefully see you in the morning, 10 a.m. conversation led by this guy right over here. And then we have a few more film programs tomorrow. So rest up. Good night. Thanks.